This is Gabe Morales once again here from Hawaii. If you like our show, please make sure you hit the like button, but more importantly, hit the subscribe button. We need more subscribers, so YouTube will bump our show up a little bit more here in their listings. Today we have a guest who started his law enforcement career way back in 1977. He has a lot of experience and is a very good trainer. He is well respected amongst his peers. Please help me welcome John Scaduto.
Good afternoon.
John, how are you? All right, how are you? Aloha.
Aloha to you too. I wish I was there. Florida is beautiful, but Hawaii's better.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you got the second best place, man. I know a lot of people retiring there, so you don't got it too bad. Not too bad during the pandemic where we're at. We could be in a lot more worse places. You know what I mean, brother?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So, John, tell us, where were you born and where'd you grow up?
I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and grew up in Boston, preferably in East Boston, where the tourists fly into Boston to Logan Airport. After that, when I was about 16, we moved to the suburbs, and in the suburbs is where I joined my first small town police department.
All right. So when you were growing up there in the greater Boston area, did you ever encounter any gang members?
Well, growing up in particularly East Boston, hanging around the North End, back then, traditional Italian section, it was just a matter of fact that you ran into people who were organized crime to the point where some of the movies made recently, their names are all over the place now. And motorcycle clubs, even back then, were quite prevalent.
Okay, so we're probably referring to some of the Whitey Bulger movies, the Winter Hill Mob. They were in the South Park, correct?
They were throughout Boston. They were housed in what's called South Boston as well as Charlestown, and their tentacles reached all throughout New England, as well as the traditional Italian organized crime, the Cosa Nostra, out of Boston's North End, with the headquarters in Providence, Rhode Island.
Got you. You know, I've never been to Boston. I've always wanted to see the Red Sox and have how do you guys call it? A beer, right? A beer?
The beer? Sure.
Yeah. I gotta get the Boston lingo down and stuff if I go up there. But anyways, John, tell us a little bit more about the crime groups that you encountered there in Boston, and why did you want to become a cop?
Well, as far as the crime groups go, starting off with bikers, up until the past 15, 20 years, the Hells Angels were very dominating and still dominate Massachusetts with, at one point, up to 6 chapters. So they were always in the, for a very small state, it's a very heavy red and white state, and so is in that region, up until the past 5 or 6 years with the other major clubs trying to come in and doing a pretty good job of causing havoc to their pretty much syndicate. So the local clubs were pretty much Hells Angels affiliated because you do have to run with the big dog. Now that's changed, and that change started a good 15 years ago with a very small bikers season, considering New England weather. In the 4 to 5 months, you've had problems there. We actually had a couple of riots where the law enforcement officers were attacked up in Laconia, New Hampshire. You've had shootings on Father's Day, leaving the lake section of New Hampshire back into Massachusetts. And those types of events, the bikers utilize to exercise dominance in a very public way. And it's the worst nightmare as a prior law enforcement administrator to have to deal with that and keep the public at some level of calmness that we have these people shooting and having rolling gun battles on a major highway. So I was exposed to them at a very early age. When moving to the suburbs, I was right next to Lowell, Mass, and there's a very significant chapter of the Hells Angels in Lowell. They're actually the first chapter to prospect and go over to the Eastern Seaboard. So they hold a very special place in the Hells Angels organization. As far as organized crime, it was just a matter of fact, Gabe. And when you meet other people that didn't grow up in a city environment, they kind of look at you like, were you corrupt and that's not the case, because you go to school with 15, 20 people. And I went to a parochial school, and we were probably worse than the public school kids. So we were cooped up all day. But you were growing up with people that you would run into later on. They went left instead of going right. They show up as in an organized crime intelligence file. And later on in life, once I chose the law enforcement profession, I was fortunate enough to have family members and associates that may have been on the other side of the fence. And I remember one prime advice that they gave me back then, and I tell all the new officers now, and if there's new people thinking about it, the phrase that was used to me is, if you play once, you play forever. Meaning if you do something against the rules, because they know the rules far better than we do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's their way to corrupt people.
Right. They got you.
And I knew never to play once, because my integrity was everything. My name was, I only have one name. So that helped me bridge that gap. Now, I've got one kid that I grew up with at the time. We laugh now. He had stolen everything up to a Rolls Royce. East Boston was known as one of the stolen car capitals of the country at a point. I've seen him in jail, in the jail where I was a captain in, and in a very public way, acknowledge me, captain. I see him from side to side, and he's okay. I don't pump him for information. He doesn't ask me for any special favors. It's business.
Yeah. So, wow, sounds like there was a lot of things going on there in Massachusetts. Definitely busy for a cop. And, our buddy Lou Savelli, I remember once, gave me a tour there around Brooklyn. And, you can't pick who you grew up with and, where you live. And he, I remember, made a comment, hey, a lot of us became gangsters and a lot of us became cops, and literally sitting in the classroom or across from each other. And then, like you said, then sometimes in the jail or prison or at the precinct, seeing these same individuals again. And so, yeah, it's sometimes a small world, but, I hope people who are non-cops understand that, yeah, it doesn't mean you're corrupt just because you have a rapport with some of these guys.
Exactly.
You just know how to talk to them, and, you don't sympathize with them, but you may understand a little better where they're coming from. And so what agencies did you work with, John? What kind of assignments? And try to keep it under an hour there, brother.
I apologize. A small town in Massachusetts, the town of Billerica, my cousin was a full-time police officer. And the small towns in Massachusetts, and even now, even with the new reform bill that just passed in Massachusetts, they didn't have enough money to hire immediately full-time officers. So they would put people on part-time. It was also a way for the agency to look at the individual to see if they were cut out for the job. I didn't realize the town of Billerica is the second largest town land size in Massachusetts. It contained a ton of bars, one of the very few 24-hour restaurants, with most of the adjoining towns, believe it or not, dry. So some nights covering that town, there would be 4 or 5 of us, period. And that's where I got to understand when I first got on the department, I'm going, gee, some of these cops are animals. And I realized that you had to be assertive immediately, because if backup arrived, it was going to be a bit. And there were many times that we actually had to send the record officers to other towns because they couldn't control the people that they had. So it was a very good learning experience to see if a young officer, I got my first beating when I was 20, and I remember holding on to all my stuff. They stole my hat. And the captain the next work day had said, John, where would you like to work? And I looked right at him and I said, Billy, I want to go back to Newman's. That's where they beat me up. It's just like falling off a bike. If you're going to say, you got to get right back on. Right.
You didn't want to let them think they intimidated you.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And then I found out later on, unfortunately, back then, every night you went to work, you were fighting. And that's what they were looking for, that you didn't back off. And because as corny as it is, we represent society, the community. If we falter, who's left to protect society? You know, in the corny way, the thin blue line, it really does exist. So while I was working at the police department, Massachusetts is a civil service town. So they kept on saying, take all the examinations for practice. So I took the examination for the Massachusetts Department of Correction and did quite well, and really didn't grow up to saying, I'm going to be a correction officer. I think things have changed now, but back then you didn't say you wanted to be a screw or a guard or the other acronyms.
It didn't have the prestige of a lot of law enforcement, other law enforcement agencies.
That's correct. And up north, there's a strict divider between corrections and police, where down here, and my own son, even though he was in the Marine Corps, he come out seasoned, but I actually applauded the fact that the Lee County Sheriff's Office would like him to start in corrections, and he is in the crossover academy now going the street, because you learn so much. You truly understand how dangerous some of these people can be, seeing them in the jail environment.
I remember at one time across America, a lot of law enforcement agencies had you start off in the jail, so you would, learn the ropes, learn about some of these guys and how they operate, and then after a year or two inside the facility, then you'd hit the street. Now, things have changed. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes not a good thing. I still I agree. I encourage all officers to at least get to know your jail staff better than just dropping off a prisoner and at booking. Take a tour. Most places are very happy. Most jails and prisons very happy to give fellow law enforcement a tour. And when I say that, I always consider myself a jail cop, a prison cop. I felt like I was equals. Not everybody has that viewpoint. They have more the viewpoint, hey, they're guards, they don't do nothing. But I didn't guard anything. I was a correctional, peace officer.
Yes, sir.
I did many of the same things. I arrested guys, and when I arrested them, I took them to the hole, for violations. That's what I wrote tickets. I just,
that's correct.
Our tickets were in-house, our court was in-house. But a lot of similarities, and I know there's differences too, and not everybody's going to feel that they're equals, but I sure did, and I always respected my fellow police officers off the street, and I think most of them respected me too. So thank you for saying that.
No, absolutely, and further on in my career, once I was an academy director at another agency, I made it a point is that when you're in corrections, and while I was working for Berwick Police, I went to work for Mass Department of Correction, and I worked the maximum security facility at Walpole. It's now called Cedar Junction. But my first week there, we had a homicide. For the short time I was there, we had 7 homicides, riots. I was involved in litigation for over a decade after I left for some of the disturbances. But the key point is that you learn now interpersonal communications. You learn verbal judo, because when you're alone in a cell block, the max on the Walpole was 45. The key to the cells, there was no key. The gallery actually opened the cells, and you were locked in. If they took you hostage, Gabe, the door key was on your person. Yeah. The only other key was in outer control. So you had to learn how to communicate very well and pick up nonverbal indicators of assaults and tension in the blocks. And that helps me to this day in my career on the street.
I agree. That's a good, important skill to learn. Yeah. If they wanted to hurt you inside, they can really, it's just up to our rapport. And a lot of people, I hear them say, I don't respect those guys. Well, I always gave them an ounce of dignity. I didn't respect what they did or what they're in there for. Some of them were in for horrendous crimes, but I still treated them as human beings. And I would say 99% of the time that respect was returned tenfold.
Oh yeah, and they understand the ramifications too if they do touch a correction officer.
Yeah, they depend on me, and to be honest, I depended on them. In a lot of ways. So yeah, it's mutual respect. A lot of people don't think it should be that way, but if you work on the inside, most officers understand what we mean by that. Thank you. So what made you then What other assignments did you have then after corrections there? And
Well, I mean, once I was in corrections, state corrections, I got on as what's called an intermittent police officer for the town of Billerica. So you're working full time, you're just not permanent. In the meantime, civil service back then, a mess, got married, and the Middlesex County Sheriff's Office, which was local, had called me, primarily jail, and in Massachusetts also functions as a house of correction. So basically crimes that are sentenced under 2.5 years can be sentenced there. So we had pretrial and committed inmates. So I took a job there, full-time with benefits, still worked the police department. So there would be, and I'm not kidding you, there'd be some nights I'd go to court on an arrest that I made in Billerica, go to Lowell District Court, same jurisdiction. And then that night at the Billerica House of Correction, which was in the same town, I'd see somebody that I had testified against that day in the tank. Hi, how you doing?
yeah,
But-
yeah, nothing personal, just doing my job. Yeah.
No. Most of the time, sorry, brother, it's overtime.
Yeah. I hear you. All right. And then, so what did you do after that?
Well, after Middlesex County, I wound up being director of basic training. We started a training program where the county had nothing. I was offered the opportunity of my life to go to the Suffolk County Sheriff's Office in Boston. And I went from director of basic training to a captain of training special operations. And probably my most enjoyable, the most influential, almost 15 years of my life. Got to travel all over the country, worked on the state boards, major operations, Democratic National Convention. My last 3 years, I was signed to the interagency ICE program. So basically, I was all over New England with Fugitive Task Force. My officers were all over New England, New York, New Jersey, transportation, fugitive ops. Plus, I had under my jurisdiction 250 to 300 federal detainees. So it was truly a learning experience.
Well, you should be proud. I know your name is still good up there in Massachusetts. You know, I ask people, hey, you know John Scaduto, and they're like, oh yeah, everybody knows John. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
So
the academies would call me the gang guy. You're gonna have the gang guy is coming next Tuesday.
right. Well, I know you have a wealth of knowledge. And then, so you got done with that. Is that when you moved to Florida, or did you do something in between?
Yes, sir. In the end of 2005, we had a very controversial sheriff, and she was actually, for 6 months, and this is all on the record, target of a federal grand jury. Long political story. The True Bill, actually a friend of mine called me that was a U.S. Marshal and said, hey, we're hearing True Bill. And after a week or two, I'm not sure about anywhere else, but in Massachusetts, nothing's legit, unfortunately. And things kind of got tampered down. And the point of view is that they had secured the True Bill, but didn't think they could bring the case to a successful prosecution. So basically after that, the entire agency changed. 16 captains or lieutenants were in one way or another forced out. I was one of the last ones. Yeah, and things change, and I get it. I was retired for about a year and a half, missed it, and I come down to Naples, Florida for one of my lieutenants' weddings. And it said 5 years before I went there, I said, told my wife, this would be a bad place to hide out. Sorry, organized crime background. And about 5 years later, I'm hiding out in Collier County, aka Naples.
Gotcha. So Naples, for a geography lesson for people, is that northern, southern Florida? Where's the nearest?
It's actually Southwest Florida, and I didn't realize it. Most of Collier County is the Everglades.
Okay, so you're way down there.
Yes, and once I got here, very much part of the cocaine cowboys and the drug culture back in the heydays of the late 70s and early 80s.
I bet. Yeah. That's an interesting area. So then tell us a little bit, John, about the Florida Gang Investigators Association. What does it do, and what are the prevalent gangs right now in Florida that you're seeing?
Okay. Well, the Florida Gang Investigators Association has been around for decades. I actually joined when I came down here immediately because of my background. I made a gang liaison. I didn't want to go through the rank thing again. So about 6 years ago, I was put on as the senior detective in the gang unit, rank a detective corporal, and really loved it. I had an opportunity to run for the Southwest Florida Regional Board of Directors slot, won, and fortunately, I still hold that position. I was just got another 2 terms in. So we host an annual conference, which is coming up in about 3 weeks. I'm working on a presentation on a prison gang called The Unforgiven. Okay. Anyone in the federal system, you're going to be seeing our people. They just secured another federal indictment late last week. And that's kind of part of the reason why my presentation isn't completed, because I had to wait for the ATF task force to make the arrest come true. Because the sad part is that, and it's public knowledge in the indictment, unfortunately, the gang was very much supported by several active law enforcement officers and state employees.
Yeah, well, like you said, way back then, you do one favor for them and you're sucked in, and that's it's too bad that happens, but yeah, I've seen it a lot. I should say it's, I have seen it before. I don't see it a lot, thank God. Yeah, but I know that it does happen. It's really, I think it's true. Nobody hates a bad cop more than cops. A lot of people think we're all corrupt, and that just frankly is not true. That is something some people that don't like law enforcement might put out there. But the majority of officers I've run into do their job. They do it well, and it's just a handful that go to the other side and become dirty cops. It's unfortunate, but it does happen. So we are aware of that, and only thing we can do is try to do better background checks. But there's some that obviously passed, and they still decided they were going to do that for greed or whatever reason, got compromised, manipulated, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, it's something probably that's never going to go away. We just got to keep an eye on it.
No, and the other thing too, I try to tell people, no matter how rigorous our hiring standards are, we recruit from the human race. Humans are not perfect. Therefore, it is going to happen. It has happened. And I hate to say it, it's going to happen again. It's human beings. But I have to go back to the Florida Gang Investigators Association, if I could.
Yes.
A conference, and I'm an old school guy, Latino Gang Investigators Association, International Outlaw Motorcycle Gang Investigation. I'm a former executive board for the East Coast Gang Investigators Association. So I'm really a gang guy. I love it, enjoy it. But FGIA, our last conference before COVID hit, we had people from 8 states, 3 foreign countries. And I'm proud to say that my president, Bob Mateo, is also the president of NAGIA, the National Gang Investigators Association. So we're kind of wired for sound right now with Bob as the national president.
Well, I know you guys got a lot of action going on there, and I know you do some good work. So my hat's off to the Florida Gang Investigators Association. I encourage everybody to try to attend at least one of their conferences. So John, if you were approaching a teen who came up to you, or they approached you, I should say, and they had some reservations about their life because gangs were trying to recruit them, what kind of advice would you have for the young teen to stay out of gangs? And I know it's kind of hard, for some kids to avoid that. I mean, they grew up around it, maybe family members in it. It's just seemed to be so prevalent today in our society. But what kind of things would you recommend that they do to try to stay out of gangs?
It's a loaded question. In Collier, we had the ability to go into schools. We were actually, because of a grant system, we were actually under the Youth Services Division. So we had unfettered access to the schools. So we would do an awful lot of intervention work very early stage, as soon as we got a report from our school deputies or school administrators. Let me start off by saying that just about every one of those kids that had started to turn, the unfortunate part is that a majority of them, I was just speaking to someone today, when you looked up their records, their parents, these children were victims of abuse, physical, sexual. The situation that they've grown up in, and I grew up in the city, my parents weren't rich, but be that as it may, the conditions were horrendous. Malnutrition, etc. Housing conditions that when I came down here to Florida, I found out, yeah, there's slums here. They're just trailers where literally you can fall through the floor. With that said, Florida has an abundant amount of sports and availability to play sports because of the weather. We're fortunate enough that Collier and Lee County is a pretty affluent area where there is sports all the time. And as a result, we would try to steer them towards sports, a different peer group. Now, I have to say that we've had a couple of football teams with a gang emerging from that team. One, we wound up deporting, two back to Haiti, 2 homicides. So that can also spur that type of activity. But for the most part, it was a way to divert them from the core group of kids who just didn't do anything, didn't go to school. Parents should be the ones incarcerated, didn't care. Massachusetts, and I don't want to offend anyone working in the youth side of the house, but Mass and Florida, they don't get the funding, they don't get the support. So even though we made plenty of referrals here, Florida Department of Families and Child Services, there's just not enough dollars, not enough people out there to assist. Unless it was an egregious incident, there would be a visit and that would be it. So the only thing I can get through this long answer is sports, other activities to try to keep them engaged with regular people because they are regular children. They're not throwaway kids. We hate to just write them off.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. So yeah, definitely, I'm a firm believer in, supporting, the after school programs, sports programs, music programs. I know they cut a lot of those programs and a lot of these kids, there's nobody there until the parents come home. And that's a key time when gangs will try to bring them in, YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club, all these Salvation Army, all these different programs are great programs. And myself and a lot of people I know are big believers, like you said, in reaching these kids while they're young. So thank you for saying that and reinforcing the importance of reaching them while young. Now, John, you and I went to the academy a long time ago. I was joking with you before, when I went to the academy, man, they were teaching on a chalkboard. And when they went to an overhead, I thought that was high tech. So if you are a brand new officer coming out of the academy today and going out into the workforce, what kind of advice would you have for that young man or young lady who's putting on the uniform and hitting the streets or, hitting the jails or prisons? What kind of advice would you give them?
I think it's multifaceted. One of the things that we don't have as much anymore is we don't have mentors. And with the Boston Access, that's the whole mentoring program where I'm sure you had your senior guy or gal. I certainly had it. And they weren't necessarily the supervisor. The guide to the side is so very important. I've had to tell so many new officers because we wound up hiring in Suffolk County. We opened 2 brand new correctional facilities. One was a high-rise, over $100 million facility. We hired almost 500 officers. And I was fortunate to be the academy director, so I got to see each and every one of those officers. And I would see them once they left the academy out in the field. And every once in a while, I would have to steer them away from a guy that he's got a cushy job. We were union. I'm not bashing unions, but he's got a cushy job. And the guy can talk a good game, but he hasn't worked on a block in about 5-6 years, if not longer. And because he's got seniority, some of the youngsters think what he said is gospel. And you'd have to kind of deprogram that from people. And I would try to tell the officers, you're going to make your own mark. Like I made my mark. You can't be John Scaduto. You can't be Fred Flintstone. You're going to have to be yourself eventually. So keep true to your instincts, keep true to your morals. And I'd give him that speech about if you play once, you play forever. And also many a night, we overseen Deer Island. Deer Island was a Civil War prison. It was a Wild West show. Most of the public knowledge, a couple of the Wahlbergs actually did time there. A lot of people did a little county time. And I took many a resignation when I had him in the field for that one night that I had him work the wings. They were zoos. And there'd be at least one out of every class going, Captain, I don't think I could do this anymore. And I would applaud them for that. Because when they hold that instinct, most of those officers wind up becoming the ones that become corrupted, become lackadaisical. And I could go on and on and on, but those are the weak links, because just how we see them in the academy setting, our predators, our super inmates, pick them out a heck of a lot easier than we do. That's their job.
Right. Their heart has to be in it. It's not, the job's not for everybody, but your heart has to be at 100%. Or yeah, you're just not going to make it. Or like you said, things can go wrong real quick.
No, if I could, I remember a day at Walpole, I got so scared, I got cold. We found bullets in a cell block.
Yeah.
And when you bullets, yeah, there was guns found in Walpole because the inmates ran it years ago.
Yeah.
So I think that was.
I remember the first time walking through the gates of Folsom Prison. I mean, that gate shut. I was shaking my boots. I'm not going to lie. I was scared, but I sucked it up. You know, I faced my fears and I went out there. And, you know, I remember, you know, hundreds of inmates' eyes upon me when I was walking, and, you know, I could hear them talking and, you know, fish cop, and, you know, all the things, the cat calls and things they did. But, you know, I stuck with it, and it was a good career for me. And I know you've had a good career also. And like I said, you're well respected still in the business. Now, probably the toughest question here, John. If you're a politician, I know you're not a politician. You've been, yeah.
No, you've asked me to clear my bad language because where I'm from. So
okay, yeah. Thank you for keeping it kind of clean here on the program. I know you're not politically correct guy. You're a good guy. I know. But being from Boston, hey, it's or New York, hey, it's just part of the lingo. But if you are a politician today, knowing what you know today about the criminal justice system, what works and what doesn't work, what kind of laws or policies would you implement to improve the system?
I just mentioned something a couple of minutes ago. One of the most depressing tours I ever took throughout the state of Massachusetts was at the Department of Youth Services Maximum Security Facility in Westboro, Mass. And I took it because at the time I was training all of their staff in gang identification. And that tour really solidified my feeling. We have an opportunity, with some, not all, to fix these kids, male and female now. But whether it's because they don't vote, maybe their family aren't looked upon as voting public, whatever it is, they lacked even pens and pencils and paper. The counselors brought them in, and the pay was just horrendous. I mean, there's no way I'd do it. I'd rather work 7-Eleven at night. But with that said, when we built that over $100 million correctional facility, these are for adult offenders. They've had their shot in Massachusetts, especially when we started holding the females. You have multiple bites at the apple to curb your conduct before you're sentenced. And the amount of money that was spent, and one thing in particular really got me mad. I'm in charge of staff training for all the staff, and I had 2 classrooms. The classroom education center in this facility rivaled a small school. All equipment, no worries for school equipment such as paper, etc. And I'm not saying that it's not warranted, but I think we failed on our priorities, because if we had a shot, it's at the juvenile level. So I would really work to change that system and I'd probably get into a couple of disagreements because I really think it's because of what they don't vote, etc. And the youth that you save today, if it costs you, say, 20 grand, is going to save the career offender that's going to cost you 200,000 or more, or someone's life.
Well, thank you. Thank you for putting that in perspective, John. You know, I hear that a lot. You know, we often spend a lot of money in corrections and society on people trying to help them, and I think you and I are both for assisting people. But when it becomes a handout and they feel they can just game the system and they really don't want to change, they're not ready yet. You know, they're not at that point. But yet we have some people that are trying to change, whether they be youngsters or even a 40-year-old convict that's gotten out and really trying to re-enter society and change his ways. He's tired of prison, jail, drugs, and they don't get much assistance or no assistance. So here we're throwing money at, I don't want to say wasting, but a lot of times it does feel that way. We have to prioritize, like you said, who really wants the help, and who is going to respond to the help, and put our dollars, most bang for the buck. I mean, we have to make some tough decisions sometimes. And some people just aren't ready. I always believe that everybody has the potential to change, but if they're not ready yet, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
No, that's correct. And, you've probably had the same type of people, but they're doing life in the installment plan. And until they either age out or go too far and get sentenced for that 15, 20-year stretch, you see them, they leave. And it's like you see on the YouTube channels or the pictures where they track someone's booking records for the 5, 10 years, and life in the installment plan. Yeah. And at what point in time do we stop saying, "Oh, John Scaduto's back in again. He was good in the kitchen. Let's give him a job in the kitchen." In the meantime,
give him another chance. Yeah, I know he's had 20 chances. Let's give him 21 chances.
Meantime, I got a first offender who's twiddling his thumbs. Give him something to do.
Well, thank you, John, for all of that, man. I know we could be on here, all day long. You have a wealth of experience and knowledge. I appreciate and respect that, and I think our viewers do too. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we close today?
No, first of all, I'm flattered that you reached out. I've attended your conferences, have a book or two here from you. But the one thing I will say is that both of us audience, we have decades of experience. But I guarantee you, we learn every day, because the day either you hear me or Gabe say or somebody else, we know it all, turn us off.
That's
we learn
correct.
every day.
Absolutely correct, sir. I never stop learning. I learned from you. I've learned from Lou. I've learned from so many people that, I consider my peers, and, I love you. If you're ever here in Hawaii, look me up. I'll give you the local boy tour. Okay.
Oh, my wife's probably in the next room going, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Seems like they're all heading over here now. The pandemic is starting to end. Yeah. But Florida, same thing. I'll look you up over there, brother. I would love to see you. And you take care of yourself, okay?
All right, you too, my friend.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Aloha to you.
Bye-bye.